Greetings everybody, welcome to G4G here on YouTube. I'm your host Napalm Dawn. Today's background soundtrack is brought to you by the Final Fantasy X OST. Since it's been a while since I've been doing videos with music in them, you know I have to get around to some of my favorite Final Fantasy music as background music, and here it is. So this is part 2 in my series of comparing the power levels of Marvel characters throughout some of the more recent games. We're using Marvel Avengers Alliance as the base, and in the first video I went through the tacticians, and today I will be going through the blasters and potentially the bruisers depending upon the speed of things. So the basis of comparison is Marvel Avengers Alliance, Strike Force, Future Fight, and a little bit Marvel Battle Lines. There won't be too many nods to Contest of Champions because it's a different kind of game, and we may also talk about Marvel Heroes a little bit. So jumping right into it, Adam Warlock, he appeared late in the game in Marvel Avengers Alliance and was pretty much ridiculously overpowered. At that point, the community believes Playdom knew the game was going to die and just released extremely strong characters for us to have fun with. His stats were crap other than his attack because he is a blaster, and he blew up, so he had blaster blow up built into him. Gains cosmic strength after an action, takes less damage from energy, he flies, he goes into the cosmic cocoon, and he has the cosmic strength. Stacks up to 10 times. Just absolutely, I mean, he is overpowered in the comics, but he was very, very much overpowered in the game. That being said, he is really nowhere other than being a card in Marvel Battle Lines, and he is in Future Fight. He's considered a bit of a glass cannon, but he's not really meta anymore. He was actually pissed off a lot of people when he came out in Future Fight, so I'd have to say the power level belongs to MAA, although he is an interesting card in Battle Lines. Amazing Spider-Girl doesn't really have any other games that she has been in. However, we have to remember that when ASW or ASG came out in MAA, she was quite overpowered for some time. She was used extensively on PvP offense, and she was used quite heavily on PvP defense. She was definitely annoying, especially in her ASG outfit with the Thirst for Vengeance. There was definitely a run of PvP where I used her for offense with Heroic Age Iron Fist, otherwise known as Hafe, and then both of them got nerfed, so they disappeared. Mordo was in Marvel Avengers Alliance. He's also in Marvel Strike Force. He's also in Marvel Future Fight. I can't recall if he's a card yet in Battle Lines. He might be. He's actually fairly solid in all of the games that he is in. He's pretty decent in Marvel Future Fight, but easily overlooked. He has an alternate uniform that brings him to his movie version, and of course Marvel Avengers Alliance had him in his classic version. Had we had a Doc Strange Spec Ops, we probably would have gotten a movie Mordo, just like Future Fight. All that being said, I honestly have to give his power level at its highest to Marvel Strike Force. He does a lot of good things in MSF, including an AoE heal block, and he also has a blind that also results in a stun on the main target. When paired with Thanos, it's very easy to feed Mordo a ton of energy, so I'm going to have to give it to Marvel Strike Force. Blizzard is nowhere. He doesn't appear in any other games currently. Cable. So Cable was originally only in MAA, but he has now begun to appear in other games like Strike Force and Future Fight. He was pretty solid in Marvel Avengers Alliance, known for doing well in PvP, and lots of people made good use of his skills, especially the psionic abilities, which had a little bit of a power spike to them as compared to his melee abilities. All that being said, I have to say that while he's good in Strike Force but better with Deadpool, his power level right now is very clearly Future Fight. He is absolutely meta in Marvel Future Fight. He is good for Hero, Blast, Mail, and puts up ridiculous scores. He's probably your go-to during No Requirement Day, and he's certainly the Mail Blaster winner right now. shooting right past Doctor Strange. So Cable, gotta give it a future fight. He's just too meta right now to lose to his rather solid performance in MAA. Cannonball serves as having the distinction as being the last mutant that MAA worked with. He's considered pretty good in the comics from what I know of him. He's been around quite a while. Unfortunately, he's only in Marvel Avengers Alliance. Crystal showed up in MAA as part of the Inhumans. She is also in Future Fight. She is not yet in MSF, as Quake is really the only Inhuman that we're dealing with over there. This is a tough one to call because she's not a particularly high power level in either game. But I would probably have to say it's honestly a tie between MAA and MFF. She's just solid in all the games that she's in, but she doesn't particularly stand out. She is getting a new uniform in Marvel Future Fight, but I don't think it adds anything crazy. Hellstrom is in Marvel Battle Lines. He is in Future Fight, and he of course was in MAA. We know him as Damien Hellstrom, but a lot of times lately he's just being called Hellstorm. Kind of maybe some way of distancing himself from this older version of him. In all the games that he's been in, I would have to say right now his highest power level was in Marvel Avengers Alliance, especially later on. And we all know that's Angrier, Breaker of Souls. Angrier was a really solid performer towards the end of the game, used pretty well in PvP, and unfortunately also could have been part of Triple Blaster Blow Up. His skills throughout the game, whether he was Angrier or he was his modern uniform, especially when his Spec Ops gear kit was popular, gotta say, he was at his strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance. He is fairly interesting in Marvel Battle Lines, but clearly Marvel Avengers Alliance wins. Deathlok is nowhere. However, a little bit of history for you. Deathlok was a bugged sprite for some time. If you looked at her on the thumbnail, her cannon was on her left arm, but when she was on the field, the cannon was on her right. Just no continuity between where her cannon was over there. I might have the order reversed, but it was messed up. Deathlok is in a few games. He was in Marvel Avengers Alliance, and he also was in Marvel Future Fight. He's considered a pretty decent leader in Marvel Future Fight, and he was okay in Marvel Avengers Alliance. The problem is that they never really unified the combat assessment. If the combat assessment properly worked with all sources of combat data, it would have been a little bit better. He did have a decent grenade with the Exhausted, which shuts down his counter class, which is a tactician. And anytime you can shut down the class that does well against you, it's always really, really positive. He had an ISO that boosted it to an AoE, and he could also do Despair with the Biotech Launcher. Really, in none of the games he's that much to write home about. I'd probably have to give the nod to Marvel Avengers Alliance. Dr. Voodoo only is in Marvel Avengers Alliance. I think he's in Marvel Contest of Champions too, but I don't own him. He was a pretty solid blaster though. Domino is in Marvel Avengers Alliance and recently showed up in Marvel Future Fight with the Deadpool update. Neither one of them, of course, have the movie representation. They're all classic Domino. Domino enjoyed a little bit of popularity with Pesty because she had a lot of debuffs that you could get to stick with him, but she was never really a huge threat. She had a good kit. She just tended to kind of underperform, and especially with her randomness and everything that she does, it was really, really hard to get her going. However, with her ISO, again, much like Deathlok, she did better against tacticians, and that's always good. She's also kind of underpowered in Marvel Future Fight, so I would have to stick with the default of saying she's at her strongest in MAA. Doc Strange in Marvel Avengers Alliance definitely enjoyed quite a good career. We also believe that we would have had a Spec Ops fairly soon after the September that the game died thanks to the movie. It's believed, and widely around the net, that there was a lot of Spec Ops plans for it, and it's very easy to find the details of what we would have dealt with. All that being said, the modern Doctor Strange was pretty solid, and I often made interesting videos out of team-up groups with him. I have to say though that his clear power spike is definitely in Marvel Future Fight. He is meta for being blast male. He was the first one to really do a solid time stop. He's just strongest right there. Electro never really showed up in any other games, but he is a card, a pretty decent card in Marvel Battle Lines, but he was very, very strong in Marvel Avengers Alliance when he released, especially with Beta Ray Bill and Thor and certain agent gear that even caused the Electro hammer bug that would just auto-win games for you on PvP defense. Elsa was really good in Marvel Avengers Alliance. When Amazing Spider-Girl got nerfed, Haith and Elsa was my go-to PvPers for some time. Unfortunately, several things came out that really toned down magic, which made Elsa not as strong. And it came out during the season in which I was using Elsa, so my stubbornness to continue using her made it very frustrating down the stretch. I would have to say this is a tough one because she was meta for a little while as a speed character in Marvel Future Fight. She, right before Kid Kaiju took over, was a speed queen. I'd have to say because of its short-lived nature in Marvel Future Fight, even though the costumes for her are good, I'd have to give it a Marvel Avengers Alliance. Fixer was a destructive force of nature when it came to boss fights in Marvel Avengers Alliance. It was very, very easy to just team him up with certain people, especially the Scroll of Rudimoroth and Enchantress, and decimate bosses for high amounts of damage. He was also part of the passive boss kill, where you don't do offensive action, you stack up mines, and then when he's properly debuffed, you just blow them all up for huge amounts of damage. He has no other compatriots in other games. Same thing for Havoc. He doesn't show up in any games either, but we all know how strong he was for quite some time in MAA's PvP, especially as a good pesty counter for a while. Human Torch has now shown up in Future Fight. We don't really know his power level there, so I'm going to have to give it to Marvel Avengers Alliance. Hybrid, of course, was the year after Doom, the Hybrid Christmas boxes. He was a lot of fun, interesting with his abilities. He also had buckets of ISOs and different uniforms, one for each of the classes, which made him quite unique. Which one was his best and which ISOs were his best is up to you, but unfortunately, and this is sad for us, we don't have Hybrid anywhere. We're probably getting Carnage and Marvel Strike Force soon though. Iron Man. Iron Man, unlike a lot of the other ones we just talked about, is well-traveled. He shows up in all of them. He was in MAA, MAA2, Marvel Strike Force, Marvel Battle Lines, Marvel Future Fight. It's gonna be a tough one, and unlike a lot of the other Avengers, Iron Man makes a pretty solid name for himself wherever he goes. The Mark V armor was considered the boss killer because he restores stamina every turn on his shield, so you would just stack Unibeam stacks on a boss and decimate him until it got nerfed. He also had an absolute ass ton of uniforms in Marvel Heroes, all the way back to his original silver one that Obadiah Stane used in the movie, to Starjammer armors and stealth armors and everything. He just had so many uniforms in that game. Comparing his power level is tough because his Hulkbuster is attached to him in here, but it's a separate character in other games. I would have to say that even though Iron Man is a little bit blast meta in Future Fight and is also used quite heavily in PvP, overall, and he's also a good leader in Marvel Battle Lines and is a good card. He's tougher to get in Marvel Strike Force as he's considered a legendary character and does really well if War Machine or Captain America's on the field. I'm gonna have to say Marvel Avengers Alliance. This is a tough one. He's good in Future Fight, but MAA, just his different uniforms gave him more longevity there. Carolina Dean, one of my favorite energy characters of all time in Marvel Avengers Alliance. I teamed her up with Beta Ray Bill and Destroyer. Sadly, for all the strength she had in this game, she's nowhere else, but at least we get to see her on screen in the Runaways show. Misty Knight is in a few games. She's a really decent card in Marvel Battle Lines. She is in Future Fight. She is in Marvel Avengers Alliance. She's absolutely nowhere in Future Fight other than being a good frost buffer for Luna. Really, it's just kind of a tie of garbage all around. She was a little fun in Avengers Alliance, but for a blaster, she was never that strong, so I'd have to say, honestly, Marvel Avengers Alliance, because she's nowhere in Future Fight. Miss Marvel enjoys the current popularity of being super popular thanks to the movie coming out. Her uniforms throughout her history of Avengers Alliance gave her spikes in power. Original was decent for a bit, and Captain Marvel really jacked up her power levels. She's also known as being one of the few characters that had every single class represented except for Infiltrator. You could get just about what you needed out of her. She is good as a universal hero in Future Fight, and she's an expensive card in Battle Lines, but she's a little bit tough to use. I'm gonna have to say, overall, Marvel Avengers Alliance is where she wins. Although, Universal Hero in Marvel Future Fight, she was able to be a strong contender in that category for some time. Gotta give it a MAA, though. Nico is, of course, now in the Runaways, on screen, with her sister Carolina Dean, and she is represented in Future Fight as Sister Grimm, but she's nowhere else. That Sister Grimm is another one of those attempts to distance her from being a runaway and running around with a lot of mutants and everything. Clearly, she was at her strongest in Marvel Avengers Alliance. She's nowhere in Future Fight, but she was quite ridiculous in Marvel Avengers Alliance when the Four Horsemen Spec Ops came out with Pesty and the Four Horsemen gear. Nova and Richard Rider were in Marvel Heroes, and I did own them. I think the base was Nova, but then you could get the adult uniform. There are some Nova characters in Marvel Battle Lines. He's also in Marvel Future Fight as a universal hero. He came out when Future Fight was dealing heavily with loot boxes, so there was a big backlash against how to get these two characters. That made it so a lot of people didn't really get him and didn't really build him up. I'd have to say, for both of them, Marvel Avengers Alliance is where they win for their power spikes. It's interesting that they represent them as two different characters, though, when a lot of the games represent them as one. Phoenix. This is going to be a tough one to talk about. Phoenix was very popular in PvP for some time, especially with the Infiltrator White Crown Phoenix uniform. Her Phoenix 5 uniform was also very good, and she covers a lot of character classes except for Scrapper and Bruiser. Eventually, when the pre-firing Infiltrator ISO got released, White Crown Phoenix in her Infiltrator form did become extremely popular. With her ability to res people, and for some time where the res was quite bugged and she could res a lot of times, she enjoyed a power spike. By the end of the game, I wouldn't say she was phoning it in, but she was just kind of average by the time the game wrapped up. That being said, in Future Fight, she is very strong. She's considered meta for Blast female, and some people use her quite effectively on no restriction days. She's kind of a counter to Doctor Strange while also doing Doctor Strange things. I think I have to give the nod to Future Fight. Rocket Raccoon is in several games. He is in Marvel Strike Force and teams up very well with Groot. He is in Marvel Future Fight, and he was also in Marvel Avengers Alliance as the bellhop uniform and his movie uniform. The bellhop uniform was part of the Kill 'Em Quickly PvP teams with like Spider-Man Noir, Spitfire, Quicksilver, Star-Lord, all those guys. This uniform tended to get more mileage than his Guardians uniform. And even though he was a bit of a glass cannon for being a tiny little raccoon blaster, I have to say, I'm going to give it to Marvel Avengers Alliance. He comes close in Strike Force if you can let him build up to his groundbreaking AoE that occurs later in matches similar to Crossbones. He's very, very good there, and he does better with Groot. However, he just was too powerful in MAA's PvP for me not to give it there. Scarlet Witch and Vision, so I'm going to talk about these two together here at the moment because they team up pretty well in Marvel Strike Force. Scarlet Witch had some PvP capabilities when she first came out, and she was always very interesting. She had a ton of uniforms in Marvel Heroes. She's in Future Fight. She's in Strike Force. In Future Fight, she can dominate PvP quite extensively thanks to her debuffs, especially where she shrinks people. Didn't really ever enjoy the Age of Ultron Scarlet Witch uniform at all. Never enjoyed that representation of her. Transient was really, really good, but of course Classic gives you the ability to get multiple ISOs, and she had a ton of ISOs. Some even bugged out some of her heroic battles and made it so that they didn't complete. She's pretty solid in Marvel Strike Force if you're running a debuff team, as she extends the time of debuffs, and if she pairs up with Vision, they both do more, and they do more of the good stuff. Vision in Marvel Strike Force has the lovely ability block, which means you can only do your basic attacks. He had some fun heroic battles in Marvel Strike Force, and his Avengers Age of Ultron suit was actually really, really solid. And he prevent lockdown effects in this uniform, which was good. He's in Future Fight, but he's really nowhere in Future Fight. He doesn't do anything, so it really comes down to MSF versus MAA. And I'd have to say, I'm going to give it to Marvel Strike Force. He's considered top tier in Strike Force, and ability lockout is just too good, plus his density shift is amazing. Shocker never really appeared anywhere, but he was an early boss in Marvel Heroes. He is somebody that you fight in the Spider-Man game, and I think you even get a uniform that's very similar to Shocker's. Have to give it to MAA. Storm enjoyed quite a decent popularity in Marvel Avengers Alliance for some time. She's recently shown up in Strike Force, and she is also in Marvel Future Fight as part of the Wolverine update. She's okay in Future Fight. She's not really meta. She is considered very good in raids in Marvel Strike Force because she carries her buffs from mission to mission, and those buffs are building up a lightning charge, which allows her other abilities to do more damage. When the electrical meta was pretty solid in Marvel Avengers Alliance down the stretch, when we had like Victor and Beta Ray Bill and Electro, Storm came back a little bit, so I'd have to say I'm going to give it a Marvel Avengers Alliance. And sadly, we're going to wrap up the video with Sunfire and Thane, who just don't have representations in other games. Unfortunately, Sunfire being a mutant meant it was hard to get him in games that were avoiding mutants. And Thane, it's so hard to find information on Thane, really. He's the son of Thanos, and you would think that we could get some things out of him with especially Thanos' popularity right now. But really, MAA is the only game that ever worked with him. His Sealing Touch was very good. His Amber Field was good. Black Hand having the Desperation and the Nano Plague was phenomenal. He was a good character, and he was actually pretty scary for some time in PvP when Blasters did well, also with Pesty. So we say goodbye to the Blasters here in video 2 with a decent mix of where characters enjoyed their spikes. There were some hard ones to call, like Elsa, being Blaster in MAA and being Speed in Future Fight and being a Speed Queen in Future Fight for some time. So way bye-bye to the Blasters, and in the next video we will get into the Bruisers and we'll tackle them. As I can see over here, there are going to be a couple skips in the top row, but Anti-Venom and Colossus have a couple games, Groot's got a couple, Heimdall's got a couple, Herc doesn't, Hulk and Hyperion have a couple, Jessica's been in a few. So take care everybody, hope you enjoyed the video.